Good evening, Miss P.
Nice to meet you after all this time.
Yes, nice to meet you as well.
Now, your knowledge on Lee Perry is so comprehensive. It's almost bordering on train spotterism. It reminds me of a really wonderful man I met a couple of years ago called Roger Stephan, who has the same kind of obsession for Bob Marley. Would it be fair to call you a Lee Perry historian?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take it that far. I suppose I would take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I struggled with this book, to be honest, was just how much to leave in. You know, it was quite agonizing at times to think, well, is this really essential to, give a fuller picture?
So editing was your main problem, keeping everything contained to...
That was one of many problems.
Yeah, we'll get to your others in a moment. Now, even armed with all there is to know about Perry, how did you set about writing this story, which has to be one of the most incredible stories in music history, about Lee Chicken Scratch Perry, who one has to describe as one of life's mysterious characters? I mean, he's been called crazy, complex, mad, totally cuckoo. I mean, how did you set about?
Complex, definitely.
Yeah.
I think, words like mad, I don't really think really apply. Personally, that's not my view. And just in answer to your question, writing it for me was not really the hard part. I think the more difficult part was the research and getting a straight answer out of scratch. That was one of the more difficult aspects of this book.
Now, research, very interesting, because through your research, it probably took you to places you didn't believe that you would ever be delving into digging up corners of reggae history that had been left untold previously. And it must have been an amazing journey in itself, just researching.
Yeah, it was a great joy for me, not only to be able to spend a good deal of time around Scratch himself and to observe him at work and sort of to be there with his blessings and from his own wishes, but also to be able to meet so many of his associates, so many of the great musicians and singers and engineers and really the foundation figures of Jamaican music.
Now, that journey alone is, as we realize, a fantastic journey. But it's unprecedented in a way, because some of the information that you uncovered was even news to me. Certain things I read in the book, oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. You kind of went into the nuts and bolts of the whole reggae history.
Well, the thing for me, when you look at Jamaican popular music, really, you keep coming back to Scratch. Scratch is just like as Dr. Alimantado, the brilliant toaster, said, Scratch is the cornerstone. He says a lot of people say that Downbeat, Clement Dodd, is the cornerstone at Studio One, but he says he really feels that Scratch is the true cornerstone, because a lot of times maybe the music being made at Studio One, Coxsone might not have actually been in the country at the time.
Well, Coxsone just facilitated stuff, but I mean, you're saying the real talent and the real genius, much of it lied with Lee Perry at the time.
Yeah, Scratch is just the connection between so many people, and what's fascinating in reggae music or Jamaican music in general are these different combinations of people. So pretty much they've all worked with Scratch at some point, and then of course a great number of other figures outside of Jamaica. So really, the deeper I delved, the more links I found, and the more people there were to talk to, and everyone had some fascinating story about Scratch.
Now, you spoke right at the top of our discussion about thinking, all right, what do I leave out? What do I leave in? How did you actually break it all down and say, all right, well, I've got enough of that part of the story, let me move on to another part?
Yeah, well, that wasn't an easy thing for me, and I think perhaps one could take the view that I have a tendency to overwrite, and I want to leave in absolutely everything possible. There were some things that were edited out, and it was suggested that maybe more things could have been edited, just in terms of some of the figures that are maybe seen as being peripheral. But to me, it's all part of the story.
Oh yeah, I think it's quite it's a very manageable size, the whole book, and it's very readable. It's not your usual sort of skirt through the history of reggae, you kind of, as I say, dig into corners and get information and revelations are revealed that have never been known before.
Well, right. I mean, thanks for saying that. It's a bit like if you just take, for an example, you know, that tune we were just listening to. This Black Ark version, a lot of people don't even know that it exists. Well, so, you know, I wouldn't want it to be too train spotterish to mention it, if you see what I mean. But to me, it's a brilliant tune. It has a history. Those who know about it, those who know Bob Marley and the Wailers, could be intrigued to know about this version. And
I mean, I do. I mean, there is no other word for you in my eyes. You are a train spotter's dream. I mean, you are the person a train spotter looks for all his life. Any Lee Perry train spotters out there, you have to meet David Katz. I mean, there's no other word. You are an obsessive.
Well,
he shakes his head and goes, I don't know. I mean, anyone who would really, I mean, first of all, a very interesting way to explain what I mean and expound my ideas further is to really bring forth the way you met Lee Perry and how you came to be writing this book in the first place.
yeah,
That's very interesting. Now, that's a story in itself, David.
indeed. Basically, I'd written an article about scratch when I still lived in the States, and I sort of grew up north of San Francisco. I was fortunate that the town I grew up in had one radio station. Sunday nights, they had a 4-hour reggae show. So I'd be bleary-eyed in school Monday morning. And this was my first exposure to Scratch's music. And, you know, reggae was the supreme music for me. And out of all the people creating it, Lee Perry's music really hit me like no other music. So I'd written this article about him, came over here, found he was still here, and contacted the people who were managing him at the time to arrange for an interview. But at the time, you know, the appointed time and place, there's Scratch doing his thing, sort of playing this wooden recorder through his nose and, you know, holding on to...
You're saying he's not crazy, but we'll get to
well,
that.
eccentric maybe, or following a different drum, but I don't know about crazy. But anyway,
Okay.
he took away this article I'd written, and when he read some of the things I had to say about his recent work, he summoned me down to this studio in Southeast London where he was based and had me go through this obscure ritual and just sort of place this heavy burden on my head of, now, you know, you are the ghostwriter. So write, you know. So, you know, what can I say, Miss P? It was like, I couldn't exactly say no, but it took me a good while to consider even beginning.
So he just looked at you and said, right, you are the ghostwriter.
Yeah, it was because he'd done a song called Introducing Myself, which I had written about in the States.
You had given it a very detailed review.
Yeah, a detailed analysis, and just basically noting what he's talking about, saying to Thatcher and Reagan and the Queen.
Because he put a curse on Margaret Thatcher, didn't he?
Indeed. And so yeah, he took it farther than that, but we better not go into that at this point. But so he was apparently struck by what I had said, because I was commenting on what he had said about, you know, in this Introducing Myself. So when I went down to the studio, he had me do this whole thing about go and get these stones, 13 stones, and I gave him these 13 stones, and, you know, lo and behold, at the end of the day's work, he put this kind of silver ring on my hand, like, hey, which hand you write with, you know? So I give him the hand I write with. He puts this silver ring on it with this kind of skull with wings, and just says, right, you're the ghostwriter. So this, you know, that was it.
No, seriously. I mean, this is going to sound really funny, but I am serious, David. Yeah. I think you're as crazy as he is.
Well, I felt that way, you know. A lot of times I thought, hey, who's saying Scratch is crazy? I must be the crazy one for trying to take this on, you know. And it took me all those years to finish it off.
But did you understand him at first?
Did I understand him?
Do you understand him now?
Does anyone understand him? Does he even understand himself?
Does he want to be understood? I
think after a fashion he does want to be understood, and the way his method of communication that's the most direct is his music. And if you listen and you pay attention, you may understand and get the message. Or if you don't get the message he intended, maybe you'll get some message that's meaningful.
What did you get?
Well,
I asked you if you understood, and I didn't allow you to answer that.
Do I understand? Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe on some level I have some concept of what he's trying to portray or achieve. Whether or not, how much I'm able to hit the nail on the head, that's anyone's guess. I couldn't really say. But, yeah, I mean, it was a pleasure just being able to be there and see him at work. This is, to me, when it's the evidence of his genius is in his work, is in his music.
So when did it stop becoming pleasure and one of the greatest ventures of your life and start becoming work? Because obviously you had to draw a line to uphold a level of professionalism in order to keep your head clear so that you could write, you could write what you felt.
Well, maybe it went the other way around in a
Okay.
sense for me, because you see, I spent those first 2 years sing scratch pretty much every day at his, by his initiative. And if he was rehearsing or recording or doing a live gig, I would be there, invited by him. And then other times he would summon me up to the house he used to live in so that he could dictate these passages to me to write down. I was never allowed to record them, but I had to write them down with pen and paper.
With the ghostwriter finger.
Of course. But, after those 2 years, he left England, so we saw each other sporadically after that time. So I think for me, those first 2 years was just to listen and observe. Most of the time, if I asked him a straight question, I would not get a straight answer. I'd get a riddle or some kind of convoluted statement. But if you if you read between the lines, you can understand that message. But sometimes for me, my brain was not quick enough like his. I couldn't really understand it until something later, and I'd get better knowledge. But also, being around him, sometimes he would want to talk about things. So if he would choose to speak about a song, like say Max Romeo's Norman the Gambler, he told me this whole long story about how it was a true story. Well, that was when I had to really take note and jot down these notes. But for me, after he left the country, I started a rough draft of this thing. So I got about 50 pages. And I'm going, man, there's too much here that I don't know. What about this person, that person, that person?
Of course.
But meanwhile, people kept turning up. Like I say, Dr. Alimantado. Yeah. Great pleasure to be able to meet him and interview him and interact with him. Then, U-Roy finally came to town, so tracked down U-Roy, interviewed him, and so on and so forth. And then, as years went by, I had more and more material. So I'd say it really became more of a professional project once there was interest in the book. Because for some of those years, most of these publishers would tell me,
he's mad, go.
No, they'd just say Lee who.
Oh, right.
They go, Lee who? And then
Really?
you'd say, they go, oh, well, if it was a Bob Marley book, there might be an angle.
Really?
And I'd sort of say, but you don't understand. If it wasn't for Lee Perry, there wouldn't be any Bob Marley out there.
That's
on
the
road.
controversial statement there, David.
Well, I think
Controversial.
I think Scratch really brought the Wailers to a level where it prepared them for the international stardom that they achieved.
But so many people did. I mean, arguably, the same accolade could have been bestowed upon Joe Higgs.
Oh, I agree. I'm not saying Scratch alone.
Okay.
But even if you look at when the Wailers were brought to Coxsone, Lee Perry was the guy that his chief task was to promote the Wailers. He had to bring around these dub plates to all the sound systems and push them as these guys are the hottest things since sliced bread. And their links run very, very deep. But to me, when, the more people I interviewed, I remember Tabby from the Mighty Diamonds saying to me, the way Bob Marley got his singing style, he got it from Scratch. Scratch is the one that really changed Bob Marley's singing style so that he sang, how he sang through the whole of the 70s. And Jimmy Riley pretty much said the same thing, even Shorty, the president, said this kind of thing. I mean, more and more artists were just bringing this to me. This wasn't my idea.
No, sure, but I mean, it's easy to get carried away on an idea like that, wherein really the whole Bob Marley story. I mean, there's maybe 10 greatest stories ever told in music history: Bob Marley, Lee Scratch Perry, James Brown, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think the deeper you delve into the story, you realize that there are several characters around each of these main characters, but to pick one or any particular incident as being the thing, the catalyst that made this whole massive thing happen for the person can be a bit problematic, because I think when you're dealing with the main character themselves, you have to look at the fact that the main character is who they are to enable things to be channeled through them. It's the whole complex thing, and I'm kind of crazy too, so
well, I understand where you're coming from, and I don't, yes, and
right.
I don't
Right.
dispute any of that. I mean, obviously Bob Marley was Bob Marley, and he never would have achieved what he had achieved if he wasn't himself.
Exactly.
But I think just the wider point I was trying to make is not only did Scratch kind of really transform the Wailers' sound when they worked together for that brief period, Scratch and the Wailers with Scratch producing, with those incredible music that came out of that combination, but also even after the Wailers broke away from Scratch's grasp, Bob Marley kept returning throughout his career, right the way up until his death.
I mean,
and it seems he only came as well when he had something really important to bring out to the people,
to
like
share.
like Ja Live, for example.
Yeah, I mean, and Scratch periodically goes back and re-records a lot of his Wailers
That's right.
materials, and like he's got an extended version. Is it Exodus? Something like 13 minutes long or something.
Yeah, right. That was actually the track he was working on with this Ghostwriter thing. Yeah, it's really strange. And then it never came out until earlier this year.
Right.
Or, sorry, last year, I suppose. Yeah.
Now, as well as bringing in your fantastic book, which I must say, it is very readable and very manageable, but I'm just one of those crazy busy people who dip and skim and everything, so I haven't read it in the true order. But you look giving me a very knowing nod, like saying, yeah, Miss P, no problem, I know your type.
Yeah, people have described that book as, it's a bit of a door stopper, Miss P. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you can put in your back pocket to read on the train,
No, not really. Especially when you start to chronicle and detail certain incidents in reggae, and then you cross-reference to, and over the way, at the same time, so-and-so is doing this. It's very complex, but not overly so.
Okay.
I like the way it draws everything together, and I like the way in when it's drawing everything together, Lee Perry's story runs fluidly amongst it, not as a side thing. It's all very cohesive. I like it.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. That's pretty much basically what I was trying to achieve.
I think you've done it. What's the best part of the book for you? I know what you're trying to achieve, but what is your favourite part?
Personally, I really enjoy the beginning of the book because it talks about, when Lee Perry had no fame, when he was just
like
another
that
country
too.
boy,
I like
and
that
just
too.
to talk about his individual family history, and also to link it to the history of that region. I suppose, those parts to me were some of the more fascinating to uncover, and I feel like those parts, read pretty well. They don't have some of the other convolution. It's not, you don't get sidetracked so much in those early parts.
I like the sidetracks because it fills in a lot of gaps for me and many other people who are reading about reggae and trying to actually piece together the history. So I do like the sidetracks. They're very, I didn't know that Coxon was a construction worker, for instance.
Okay.
Those little tiny gems that may only take up a line, but thank you very much. Do you know what I mean? Now, as well as bringing in the fantastic book, you brought in loads of vinyls that if this wasn't the BBC and I wasn't such a respectable woman, you may have been relieved of some of those copies. But we've got something lined up that you chose. Tell us about it.
Okay. It's a vocal by Dave Barker, Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying, which is a cover, Dave told me, of a Jose Feliciano song.
Oh, wonderful.
And I thought we'd bring it in just to show how versatile a producer Lee Perry is. Because, as we were saying earlier off air, Dave Barker has such a wonderful voice and a wonderful singing voice, sort of very, very underrated as a vocalist, and I'd say particularly underrated as a singer, because he was really more famous as kind of a Yankee-style DJ, which, if you read in the book, that was also partly Scratch's doing. But I just brought that in because, it has some pretty amazing vocal work and harmonies, and I think when most people think of Lee Perry's work, they don't particularly think of this type of a track, but it's definitely a part of his greater oeuvre, his sort of what he was building up and drawing on.
So this is Dave Barker.
you cry. Don't let the sun catch you cry. Don't let the sun catch you crying. Catch you crying. The nights are dying for your tears. Oh, your heart may be broken tonight, but remember when the morning bright. Don't let the sun get you crying. The nighttime shadows disappear. And it enfold all your tears. Oh, the sunshine with great joy for every girl and boy. So don't let the sun catch you crying. We know that crying is not a bad thing. Yeah. So save your crying for the fasting. Yeah. It may be yours to discover that you'll be left for another. But you gotta remember that love is just a game, and it can always come again. So don't let the sun catch you crying. Don't let the sun catch you crying.
That's definitely Peter Tosh on BB's there somewhere. Sounds a lot like him.
It does sound like the Wailers backing it up. Yeah.
That's Dave Barker, Don't Let the Sun. What a voice.
Indeed.
I love his singing. Now, one thing that becomes apparent as you read through People Funny Boy is the fact that Lee Perry was so often denied the credits for his work.
True.
In so many cases. It seems maybe in 75% of the cases, some of the music we hear and we don't even realize to this day that Lee Perry was responsible.
Well, I think again that's part of anyone who knows Jamaican music knows that there's, you look at a record, half the time it's blank, no information of any kind.
Right.
And there really haven't been, thankfully there've been a few books recently to come out, charting reggae's history, some excellent books out there at the moment. But it's really only recently that it's begun to be chronicled, maybe more seriously and with more attention paid to some of this detail.
I mean, what was Lee Perry's reaction to that? That after a while he's realizing that here he is, one of the cornerstones. Maybe he didn't realize that at the time, but he realized, well, I am a great innovator. He realized how his worth.
Definitely.
At the time. But how did he feel when he saw he was being shortchanged?
Well, I think it's always been a sore point for him, one of many. But I think it's greatly irked him right from the start, right when he was there working for Cox and Dodd and, writing tunes, not always getting the credit for it. In fact, if you want to go earlier than that, when he was trying to work for Duke Reid and Duke Reid refused to record him, then stole his lyrics and gave them to... Yeah.
All sorts of people. I mean, at both points, both producers, Cox and Duke Reid, said more or less that he couldn't sing. He was a bit off key, and
right.
He must have felt a bit hurt by that.
Yeah, I think he always, he said it himself. He always wanted to be a singer, and he began as a singer. He recorded over 30 vocal sides for Coxon alone. Then I think later when things sort of go a bit haywire or go wrong and he closes the doors of the Black Ark, he says it's because he wanted to go back to singing.
Really?
Yeah.
So producing was really a second choice occupation. I can't believe it.
Well, this seems to be the way that it went, I think he was writing songs from an earlier age before he came to Kingston, and he came into town and tried to make it as a singer, I mean, for those of us on the listening end, Scratch is chiefly known for his production. And I don't think, I think he understands that he had a real forte in production. I don't think
You're
it's...
such a diplomat, David.
That's the way I
You're
see it.
cool.
Miss
You're
P.
good. David Katz is my guest tonight on Rhythm and Blues London Live, the BBC station for London. We're speaking about his new book, People Funny Boy, which is a biography, and almost it's as close to an autobiography as I've ever read before, because there are so many personal references from scratch, and the fact that he literally proofread it himself, didn't he?
Yeah, we
That's
sat down
unusual.
together. That was very, very helpful. That was
Right, of
utmost,
course.
of use. We sat down together for a few days in Dusseldorf in peculiar circumstances, but I basically read him the bulk of the text, and he could stop me and say, "Whoa, hold on a minute, who said that?" Or other times he'd go, "Yeah, this is exactly right," and then go on to tell me a lot more that I didn't
Okay.
already know.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but in an ideal world, Miss P, I think ideally it would have been the best had it been nothing but an autobiography and had nothing but Scratch telling his
I
own
don't
story.
think we would have been able to follow his train of thought. Seriously. This is serious. I don't think the average person, as much as they loved him, would have been able to follow his cosmology. And I think we'd need a third person to channel it through. Unfortunately, and fortunately, it was you. Now, the Black Hawk Days,
Yeah,
very important for him, very significant on many, many levels.
indeed.
Mm.
Yeah,
Tell me a
well,
bit more.
well, basically, once he got into producing, he was freelancing for a time in the Rocksteady years. He was working at Whirl Studio, which is now Dynamics, but he got kicked out of Whirl because a bigger man, Bunny Lee, came along who had more influence. So then, Scratch teamed up with Joe Gibbs briefly, but Joe Gibbs, that situation wasn't much different than
Yeah.
Coxon. And then he kind of had this partnership with Clancy Eccles for a while, teamed up with Whirl's engineer, Andy Capp, otherwise known as Linford Anderson. They formed this Upset label together, and then Scratch broke away from that and formed the Upsetter label and never looked back. But all those years of producing, he never had his own facility, and he was always reliant on, he had to fit what he wanted to do into other people's wants and needs.
Then they would always nick his ideas anyway.
To a degree,
Yeah.
perhaps, yeah. But, the legend has it he was scouring Kingston for a suitable place, and then one day was at home in Washington Gardens and had a vision underneath this lignum vitae tree, which is a particular tree that grows.
Jamaica's national tree.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So, there's one in the yard at Studio One as well, interestingly enough.
There's one in my father's yard in Washington Drive.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, well, so apparently he had this vision. This is the place. Build the studio right here. So he just built it in what was really kind of, the size of a garage or something. I mean, not very big. Although he made very good use of the space, building up, making his control booth upstairs. So not a very wide space, but made good use of a tall roof. And once he was there, he could really let his ideas out so much better, free from time constraints and largely free from the sort of financial worries that you have to always, be thinking about ticking on the clock when you're in somebody else's studio. So many amazing musics came out of the Ark, but, in the early days of the Ark, we've got things like this track that we've got queued up here, which is a dub of Dr. Alamantado's Ride On, called Princess Street Skank. And it's just, even in these early days of the Ark, when the equipment was so limited, he was actually using this mixing desk that was designed for a radio station. It's probably not that different from the one you've got your finger on at the moment.
It's probably the same one.
It had like a single VU meter.
This is the same one.
Well,
It's got to be.
But even then, he was getting these incredible sounds, from this very limited equipment. A little 4-track studio. Yeah.
Okay, shall we listen?
Give it a spin.
I know most of you people out there today have lost that loving feeling. But please find that loving feeling and let's ride on.
dig that crazy beat.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Princess Street Skank. That's a version of a Dr. Alimentado tune, you said?
Yes, apparently with the Soul Syndicate band.
Okay. Now, as I was giving you back the Dave, I've got to say this. As I was taking the Dave Barker track we played previously off the turntable, and I was handing it to you, and I noticed my brother Lepke's handwriting on the label. Now, I have to explain briefly. My brother Lepke is a connoisseur, a record collector, has all that stuff. And he always used to buy and sell reggae stuff, vintage stuff, and auction them and sell them off or something.
Definitely.
And I said to you, you bought this from my brother. Not quite, you said, but it's probably passed through his hands.
Some roundabout route. But I have to give thanks and praises to your brother for, supplying me with so much great music over the years. And also, when I first came to London as a teenager, being really blown away by the DBC sound system, that Dread Broadcasting Corporation.
He's got a lot to answer for, my brother. Okay, now, I was going to ask you, we were talking about Black Ark.
Yes.
And the fantastic sounds that came out of Black Ark, like the track we just played, the sound effects that Perry used, the way he utilized space and actually made it work for him too. Why did he burn it down?
Well, yeah, that's really the big question. I mean, he's given so many conflicting accounts over the years, even denying that he burned it down, then insisting that he burned it down. So when we sat down together that time in Dusseldorf, I just asked him point blank, hey, Scratch, can we get this straight once and for all? Did you burn it down? Yes. Who else could burn it? Well, so, all right, why? And basically he was saying, all these things were going on down there that were so negative at that time. This is coming up like late 78. And, the first person to mention it to me was Earl 16, said there were these members from a political gang who were coming down there, gunmen, extorting money from Scratch regularly. Scratch confirmed this. These gunmen were down there harassing him. And not only that, but you had all these disgruntled musicians and singers who thought that Scratch had this big bag of money coming in from foreign regularly and were all kind of trying to feed off him for a handout. Then you had some other situations that were pretty negative, like his long-term partner and the mother of 3 of his kids going off with another musician whose career, Scratch had helped to build. And then, sort of to cap it all, you had this radical group of Rastafari, Nyabingi people who had just sort of based themselves at the Ark, and Scratch was involved with them, and they were also looking to be bankrolled by Scratch, and they were looking for him to kind of be part of their revolutionary movement.
The benevolent part, obviously.
Apparently.
Yeah.
So I think all these things work together to take their toll. Then he also mentioned that, of course, he was working day in and day out for other people when really all he wanted to do was sing, create his own music. So instead, he'd be working 4 days straight